Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night, 7:07 p.m. Central. We're listening to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM, New Orleans. We got Jay McNicholas with us here tonight.
Good evening.
He's been having to work a lot, so it's good to have him here when he's not a slave to Home Depot.
Wage slave. No, I'm no longer there. I'm at Lowe's now.
Oh, were you at Home Depot? Or am I
For
getting,
almost 9 years,
am
yeah.
I getting depots mixed? Well, it's good to have you here. Tonight's guest, Will Murray. Good to have you here, Will. And first off, I just want to say I've talked about the Skinwalker Ranch shows. I really think that I don't normally even watch those kind of shows. Like I watch some UFO documentaries. One of my favorite UFO documentaries is that Dan Aykroyd one where he's smoking a cigar and talking to David Sarita about UFOs. That's one of my favorites. I prefer just documentaries. Most of those shows, with ghosts and stuff, some of them may be good, but a lot of them I just don't watch. But when it comes to Secret Skinwalker Ranch, Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, I feel like my jaw drops a lot. Like, what in the hell's going on? And then there's so many government personnel intertwined with it and stuff. I'm like, what? This is the craziest thing I've ever seen on TV, I mean, they're ending seasons of that show sitting down with former governors of Utah, attorney state generals, Bigelow security. Like they're ending the last season seemed like it ended with them agreeing that there's some kind of weird base underneath there. It just gets crazier and crazier.
Like an alien base?
Yeah, or whatever. They don't seem to know. I mean, that seems to be I don't know seems to be the answer for a lot of it. But I guess, and then of course you had the Chris Bledsoe episode where he got on there and summoned UFOs. And I know I've had interactions with that type phenomenon since my 20s, and I've asked some of it to move, and it'll move. And it's been a while, but I've had some similar phenomenon. I don't think I could go out there right now and do it. I don't think they like me anymore for some reason. But anyway, basically this dude can summon UFOs. He's there with Colonel John Alexander. He's there with former CIA. And he put out the book UFO of God, which I'm reading now slowly but surely. And it seems like the whole book, underneath all the reviews on Amazon, people are like, I'm having my own phenomenon. So it kind of seems like there's these forces at work that want people out here interacting with this phenomenon, which is fine and dandy. But what is the phenomenon? Number one, I'm not sure I trust the phenomenon. And then number two, there's a lot of government stuff going on. And it's like, are they trying to get people outside to interact with it so they can watch and gather like superheroes to work with it? It's just so many crazy levels of it, as far as TV shows go. But I guess Will, what the hell's going on? You don't know either. With that, is that the?
I don't know because the things I deal with are on a broader canvas. Yeah. I know apart from the remote viewing of what was a crash disc that I did as part of the team that did a huge remote viewing tasking for the third episode of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch. The things I normally deal with are ghost and entity infestations, I'll call them that, in people's houses. I've cleared about 40 houses. Sometimes I have to go back a year or so later and do another clearing because other things pop up. But I always have overnight results, which is still staggers me because you'd think I'd blow it once in a while, but no, that doesn't happen. So, I don't remember who did the paperback back in the 60s or 70s, This Haunted Planet. It was one of the
Keel.
Yeah, I thought it was Keel. I have to say, based on my interactions with many phenomena, there's a lot of weird stuff going on. We've recently been reading about hints at what the government or people investigating UFOs are talking about, the shadow biome. And the shadow biome is either a reality or another planet that interpenetrates our own, or another dimension that interpenetrates our own, from which things like UFOs and other things cross over and then return if they can. And, I certainly know people who have seen things that you would normally think of as belonging to folklore or myth. And I've had some encounters, not visually seeing, but as a remote viewer, and saying, am I really seeing that? Because I didn't really believe in this particular kind of personalities, shall we say. And so, there's a lot going on. And I noticed, because I've joined UFO Twitter in the last few years, which is kind of a big zoo of all sorts of ideas, that people are trying to connect psychic phenomenon with UFO phenomenon. And I can see why they do that. And I'm not saying they're completely wrong, but I think you have to understand that, your pet cat, your house cat, and a tiger are both felines, but they're very different otherwise. So I think we have to be careful, just because we see similar phenomena in these different quadrants of unreality, to coin a phrase, doesn't mean they're necessarily connected. They may have overlapping elements, but they're not necessarily all one piece, unless you consider the entire universe all of one piece, which it is, obviously. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did. It's the quantum realms. We just had Carter Bouchard on. He's from BFRO, and a very down-to-earth guy. And he was saying he thinks there's about 500,000 to 1 million Bigfoot in the United States alone. But he was even hitting that they may be in some kind of alternate timeline, that he wasn't sure that they could be, physical, but there was something else going on with that stuff. And this is the most down-to-earth dude ever, and he was kind of hinting that, are they in a shadow realm or something, like another dimension? Sons of pain.
We can't possibly have a biological tribe of big feet, to use that term, all across the U.S. without finding bones, bodies, juveniles, infants, dead juveniles. I mean, it's got to be something else if it's anything. Another theory.
To that point, though, they have done some studies. Don't forget the name of the show. It was Matt Moneymaker's show. I forget the name of it. Something Bigfoot, Hunting Bigfoot, probably.
Finding Bigfoot.
But the reason why we don't find bones is a couple things. So most observed behavior of Bigfoot is ape behavior, primate behavior, like what we do. And we bury our dead, and we've been burying our dead since caveman times.
Yeah.
So that's possible. We don't have any proof of that, so it's just speculation. But they did do a really cool episode where they had found a deer that was, I guess, struck on the road and had been killed. And so they used it with, I think, permission from the county. And they staked it out in this guy's backyard in the woods. And I'm not sure where it was. It's on the East Coast somewhere, but I don't know where on the East Coast. But it was summertime. They staked this deer out, and it probably weighed 300 pounds. It only took 7 days for all the bones to be scattered, except for small little bits that you'd have to really search the ground for. So nature has a way of hiding things from us. So the possibility of us not finding bones, I can deal with. But the numbers, that's all speculation. Even if Carter is an expert like I am, I don't think he's wrong. It's they evade us on purpose. But I don't believe that they're shadow realm creatures, and I don't think they travel dimensions.
And he saw a physical Bigfoot. But let's not get into Bigfoot too much. I want to know, Will, about what fascinating remote viewing cases is there some you'd like to share with us? And I'm also trying to figure out, when you're going, dealing with this stuff and doing clearing, what is your belief system? Is it, obviously, I don't know if you're religious or not, but what is your belief system? And I want to hear some of the most fascinating cases.
Well, I don't necessarily have a belief system as such. I trained at a spiritualist church, but I don't go to the church anymore since my training ended. And I guess I'm more of an explorer and less interested in belief than in what my experiences tell me and what my research or what other people's experiences inform what I encounter. So I don't have an overarching theory of things, and I don't have a belief system as such. I'm trying to be super open-minded and just saying, which enables me to encounter some of the things I do and say, okay, this doesn't seem real, but here it is, and I got to deal with it. I'll tell you, I wasn't expecting you to ask me about my remote viewing experiences in terms of pure remote viewing when I was in training, but I'll tell you one that was interesting. And there's several that were interesting, but the one that really kind of like said, was I trained with David Morehouse between the year 1999 and 2003 in various cities, progressing from, an one-day intake class to week-long, 50-person classes. And in between these classes, Dave would give us take-home targets in envelopes, sealed envelopes, and we would work them as practice. So I worked through a number of those envelopes. And one of them, and remember, or to be very clear, all these things, envelopes had the coordinate numbers on the front, and you had no other information about it. And the coordinate numbers were metaphysical addresses in the matrix of all creation. They weren't longitude or latitude, so you had no clue what you're going to be looking at. So I took this envelope, memorized the coordinates, lay down and memorize the coordinates, and went through the extended remote viewing process, which I won't get into, but the end of it involves going through a kind of a tunnel or wormhole and popping through a membrane into the target environment. Normally, I would roll into land or water. Here, I found myself floating above a desert environment, and I thought, well, it's interesting. I'm flying above the target, and the target's big. It's a desert. And I see a minaret in the far distance, so I know it's the Middle East somewhere or Northern Africa. And so I'm floating above the target area, and then I'm pulled down underground. And I found myself in this sort of underground chamber, and there were these two robed figures like monks facing what looked like a tabernacle or an altar or something. So I sort of, stood there, in terms of my my mental probe or whatever it was. I don't know whether I'm there as a soul or an astral form or whatever. There's many theories there, but I'm there sort of imagining myself standing and watching, and I watched them quietly. And one of them became aware of me and turned and said, "Go." Now, I'm not the kind of guy to go. So, it was my take-home target. I was going to work it. So I didn't go. I just stood there, and they kept doing whatever they were doing at this tabernacle. Finally, one of them turned, and either he said, "Go again," I don't remember, but he gestured at me and slammed. I was slammed back into my body. I'm thinking, what the hell was that? So I knew better than go back. I'd been pretty seriously slammed. So I grabbed the envelope, tore it open, and the target was, locate and describe the current location of the Ark of the Covenant. And I'm thinking, well, that fits the Middle East. That kind of fits the two robed figures at the tabernacle in the sense that maybe they were guardians of this thing. And it all kind of fits, get the hell out of here.
Do you recall what color the robes were?
I don't always see color, but my impression is they were kind of an ash gray, but don't quote me. But that was 20-something years ago.
Well, it's funny you say that because all of the depictions there's a special clothing and robes that the handlers of the Ark had to wear. And most of the depictions are either a grayish blue or lightish gray robe with some kind of necklace around it with certain stones to protect them from the energy coming from it.
Now that's interesting because I had no idea that there was a belief or an understanding that the guardians of the Ark, which prior to this thing I didn't necessarily believe in or not believe in. I just didn't have an opinion. I had no idea there was a color associated with them. But when you say it, I don't. I'm psychic, so sometimes when you ask a question like this, I may flash to the answer and not be specifically remember in the exact color, but an ash gray is what comes to mind when you said that.
Yeah.
So
that's cool.
How exactly did you get caught up in remote viewing, and then you did work for the government. I know David Morehouse. I mean, I don't know him, but I've heard the name before. But can you give us a little bit of a bio on that, how that happened?
Well, I never worked for the government. I was never in the military. What happened was around 1995, 96, when the original remote viewing program was shut down. Shortly after that, many of the viewers went into civilian life, and they started training people. And the first wave they trained was supposedly limited to law enforcement personnel. Then they opened it up, I think in 96, 97, or 98, probably 97 or 8, to civilians. And I had just begun working as a professional psychic, and someone brought my attention to Morehouse's autobiography, Psychic Warrior. And that same person, and I bought it and I read it, I was intrigued. And that same person brought my attention to an Omega Institute outreach program that was taking place in a church in Boston, which is near where I live, where there was a one-day remote viewing seminar conducted by David Morehouse. So I signed up for it. I went into it. And, a lot of Dave's classes begin with him talking about his life in the military and how he became involved in remote viewing and all the things leading up to it. We did one target. And what was interesting about that target to me, again, you don't know what the target is, but it's just coordinates. So I found myself once again, sort of floating beside what looked like a hill or a mountain that had foliage that made me think of Southeast Asia, like Cambodia. And I had a sense of water below my feet, but I didn't see it. I just saw this sort of hill or mountain or whatever it was, high hill or low mountain. And for some reason, it came to me how high the mountain was, but it came to me in kilometers, which I don't know. I know miles, and even miles I'm kind of shaky on. And so, I did my session sketches, and it was the target was Lord Howe Island, or Lord Howe Island, Howe, which is off the coast of Australia, not near Cambodia, but certainly kind of closer to that part of the world than where I was. And on that island, there are two hills or mountains, one stony or volcanic. The other is covered in vegetation. That was the one I saw. And there was water beneath it because it was an island. And I said to Dave, when I talked about what I'd seen, I said, what's strange is I got the height of the thing in kilometers, and I don't know kilometers. And I told him how many kilometers. He looked at me very strangely and said, I think that's right. And, I don't know why I would get in kilometers when I don't know kilometers. But that's one of the freaky things that happened. So I took that one-day class, and then a year later I went to Omega Institute for the week-long first session. I think that was the CRV training, which was sitting up and writing everything down on paper. The ERV is what I did the following class, which is more out-of-body kind of work, lying down out of body and entering the environment and really, reconnoitering it. So that's how I got into remote viewing.
And one of my big experiences that I've had is seeing beams of light with my physical eyes. I've seen a few leave my house here in Florida as if they were in it and came out and flew into the heavens. And that particular time I was completely sober. And there have been times where I was not sober on weed or something and seen weird stuff. But beams of light have come up a lot. And I wondered if it was deceased loved ones, or, there's so many different things from angels to aliens. But when it comes to remote viewing, do beings come up in some of this stuff? Like, let's say an alien or a being of light.
Yeah, Dave, I can't comment on your beams of light because I've never had the experience. Although once I saw something shooting up from houses in the distance that looked like someone shut off a single firework, but nothing exploded. And I don't understand what that was, but I don't have a feeling of what it was either. So I can't comment on that. But Dave was the only one of those original Stargate remote viewers who they trained civilians during the post-Stargate period. he would run us against what are called non-feedback targets or exotic targets. A non-feedback target is a target for which we don't have any photographic evidence, no witnesses usually, and or anything like that. And often they were, things to things that are, out there, things that are, historical mysteries or unknown things, of which, UFOs are one. So he would run us against a few things like that. Not too many, because the purpose of the class was to teach it a remote view in terms of real world things, but he liked to do that. I understand he stopped after a while doing that, but I worked a number of targets that were, out there, and I had good experiences doing it. I didn't have any problems. So, if you've read any of the books by the original remote viewers or even subsequent people, they will tell you there's an intersection between remote viewing and UFO stuff, which, could explain why people are going out and now summoning these things, if that's in fact what's happening. Because, we're talking about doing consciousness work on a high order, and everything we know about UFOs and those who pilot them, they seem to be pretty advanced consciously. I used to say, and I still say, that, in terms of the remote viewing stuff I've done, the difference between what we might call an alien and a higher spiritual intelligence may be a difference without a distinction, or a distinction without a difference.
There's definitely, I don't know if you've ever read any of the Courtney Brown stuff. That gets really weird, like remote viewing alien reptilian bases. And I mean, there's a point where you have to, I've had some alien stuff happen to me, and there's been times I've laid around and it's felt like I'm looking in a ship and I see beings. But you have to kind of, I guess I don't know if it's my imagination or like me really seeing it astrally. How do you deal with that process? Like figuring out what's concrete and what's maybe, Lord of the Rings, your imagination.
Well, in terms of the things I did in training, of course, we would get debriefed afterwards. So we would, if he told us, well, I put you on a ship that was passing between dimensions, and that's what you experienced, and you didn't know what you were going to go into going in, you could pretty much say, well, obviously there's no power of suggestion here in terms of, him saying, I'm going to put you on a ship somewhere and you're going to interact with the crew. When I've done this stuff, I've learned to take it as face value, to not judge it. The axiom for remote viewers is that you're supposed to describe the target, not try to identify it. So you try to tamp down all these analytical elements that might come out of your consciousness, so that if you find yourself staring at a 2-foot tall elf in an environment, you can say to yourself briefly, I think this is my imagination, but then you have to proceed and say, okay, I'm going to have to proceed as if it's not and see what happens.
And I definitely want to talk about your clearing more, but one thing I want to definitely find out about, and I know Skinwalker Ranch is so many things to talk about, but what can you tell us about the experience with the remote viewing there and maybe some of the data?
Well, what happened was in January, I heard from a former student, a fellow student of Dave on Facebook saying Dave was putting together a team for a History Channel television show project. You interested? And I said yes, because I hadn't done any protocol remote viewing in probably close to 20 years, even though I've done a lot of things that are related to it. So, we got on a Zoom call, Dave and several others, and he briefed us, and he said, I can't tell you the name of the show, except that it's a news show. I can't tell you anything except, if you're volunteering, this is what I need, and this is when I need it. And so we all signed on, and there was a secrecy type of thing around it. And when the time came, he gave us the target in 3 parts: the geographic environment as it is now, the air above the target, round target, and I think a little bit below it, in certain stages. And I had trouble with this one. The first one was basically map dowsing, which I don't care for that much. I didn't get a lot of training in it back in the day. The second one was I want you to look at the air above the target at 10,000 feet, then at 20,000 feet, then 30,000 feet. And I didn't understand what he was trying to get us to do. And I produced a sketch that I thought was, questionable. And it turned out to be, if it was anything related to what he wanted us to perceive, it was kind of, messed up in the translation. But the third component where I had a lot of fun was this was a time travel target. He wanted us to look at the same location during a specific 6 or 7 or 8 hour window on a specific date in 1976, April of 1976. They just said, tell me what's going on in that window. Okay? So I'm going to tell you what I saw. Other people saw different things, and it appears that this particular environment, which was a ranch, I'm not going to say for privacy reasons where it is. You can look at the 3rd episode of Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, and it will tell you what they're willing to tell you. I think it's near Pikes Peak, but I've already forgotten a lot of this. I went into my zone and started viewing, the usual way. You create a little mental safe space in your head. You imagine yourself in a space place. You clear all your worries, and you go down essentially a wormhole, and you pop through the membrane, and then you're in the environment. I found myself in a night environment that appeared to be rural, but I couldn't see much of it because the major thing going on was there was a convoy of military trucks racing through the night to a specific location. When they arrived at their destination, there was a crashed disc. And of course, this was very interesting to me because I didn't expect that. Even though Dave had us do this kind of stuff, I didn't know what the show was. So I didn't, there are other shows the History Channel does, including that one about the treasure in the island that they keep looking at. So I observed a cordon being placed around the crash disc, a military cordon, and the searchlights were set up, and a lot of, what were probably Air Force, but might have been other service personnel, cordoning the thing off and trying to figure out what to do. They were very concerned about several things. Was anybody in the ship? Were they injured? Can we salvage this thing? Can we salvage this thing without causing an issue or hostilities? They were very concerned about. And there was a lot of arguments. A helicopter landed, and it looked like the guy from the CIA was popping in to check out what was going on. And so there was a lot of conversation and worry while they tried to figure out what to do. There's a thing in remote viewing called time sliding, where when you go into an environment and you see something and you observe it for a few minutes and nothing's changing, you move forward. I didn't consciously do time sliding, but what happened was that after I observed the nighttime activity for a while, I segued into the dawn time period. The sun was coming up, and a second ship appeared above the crashed ship. Larger but similar in configuration, a disc with a dome on top. And it flashed its rim lights, which it had all around its edge, as a way to kind of let the guys on the ground know that we're here, and we're here to reclaim our ship. That was what I got the intention of the lights was. And over time, which is some part of the morning, I guess, the ship slowly descended incrementally in a way that it wouldn't cause a reaction on the ground. Now, I did, I think, pop into the crash ship. Yeah, I should say this first. I popped into the crash ship, and I saw 4 basically grays. Well, I don't know if I saw them as grays, but they had egg-shaped heads and spindly bodies and arms, and the usual kind of gray head. the eyes, the nose, the lack of nose, and the mouth that we usually see described. And one of the guys was slumped at his console, unconscious. He had a concussion. 2 were injured, but the command pilot was okay. And he was thinking, like, okay, I was getting what was going on from him. They had been doing terrain mapping, updating maps, and they were concerned about a nearby military base. It turns out there was a military base. There's an Air Force base near this ranch. So that part was accurate. And they've been doing terrain mapping to update their maps from the last time they'd done it, and they had special interest in the local military base, partially because there were dangerous components there, which I think were probably nuclear, but I don't know. And they've been flying along, and there was a problem with a change in Earth's magnetic field coupled with a gravitational anomaly. I'm reading my session thing on my big screen here. And that caused the crash. So he's thinking, the command pilot is thinking, this is an occupational hazard of this duty, and I'm surrounded by barbarians, what he thought were barbarians, which are our military force. And he sends out an SOS, and he's waiting for a response. So that's when the ship shows up at the dawn and slowly descends incrementally so as not to initiate, a violent reaction from the ground forces. And from the bottom of the bigger disc, they extruded something that seemed to be liquid metal, and it tried to hook onto the dome of the crash ship. But the dome of the crash ship was damaged. They were having trouble with it, but they finally succeeded. And once they joined, the big ship lifted off and took the smaller ship away. And there was nothing the military people could do because there had been no hostilities, no firing, and they knew that if they fired at the big ship, it would ignite something they didn't want to ignite. So, and the last thing I got on that initial pass was the ships were going back to their permanent base in Antarctica, near or in McMurdo Sound. I also heard something about the Kamchatka Peninsula, but I think that's more up towards Russia. That might be there's another base there. Now, I don't know that people have talked about a base in Antarctica, but I wouldn't be surprised if they had, because
there is.
People have been talking about bases here, there, and everywhere. So Antarctica would be perfect. So that's
the story for McMurdo. That base used to be New Schwabenland. The Germans at the end of World War II. Well, actually, no. I think in the middle of World War II, 1942, I think is when they sent the first ships down there. But 1945, the war ends. The last battle of World War II isn't recorded as a battle of World War II. Is a battle that happened between Admiral Byrd and a flotilla of U.S. Navy ships, including carriers. Apparently between Nazi Messerschmitt 232 or 262s, the jets, and UFOs. And we apparently got our asses handed to us and limped back to Chile for medical help. Several ships were sunk, several sailors were killed, and Admiral Byrd was ordered by the president and the higher cabinet to never speak about it again. But it has come out, and that base now is where that German base was relative to McMurdo is only like a couple of 100 yards or so.
I may have heard about some of this, but I have to tell you, I never put any stock into what little I heard, because there's lots of stories out there and lots of disinformation. So I try to not get too wrapped up in any one particular thing that people say happened, which doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means that, I don't get caught up in the rabbit holes because I'm doing work. I'm not reading this stuff to try to figure things out, because I think there's too much disinformation. I'm just trying to do what I'm tasked to do when I'm tasked to do things. And it's like I'm like a gunslinger in the sense that you need something done, I go and do it, get it done, and that I add it to my experience resume, but I don't get too wrapped up in all of what it means or connecting the dots, because I write a lot of books and other things, and I can't spend all my time, in these rabbit holes. But they're interesting rabbit holes. But they're rabbit holes.
Yeah, it's a perfect description of it too. Rabbit hole for sure.
And one thing I was going to ask: when they got you to do stuff for the show, did you do it from home, or did they have to take you out to the ranch, or they take you?
No. We were all anonymous. Dave was the only person in touch with the production company, and they had a lot of difficulties with them because they didn't understand remote viewing, and he didn't understand TV. For instance, we all produced session summaries that ran several pages, and these are all pretty much thrown away by the production company because it wasn't visual. Our session sketches were the only things that mattered, and I'm going to show you some session sketches. This is and these are rough. I didn't take the time to do finished sketches. I don't know if you can see it, but that's an overview of the disc, and the dots are where the pilot and the 3 crewmen were. This is more of that, a side view of the disc, and when we did Zoom. I don't know if you can see this stuff.
I can see it.
Okay, when Dave,
yeah, we can see it.
When Dave copied this stuff over for the History Channel, he made the remark in one of the Zoom debriefings that this was a great sketch because I included the fact that the thing was 50 feet in diameter and the surface was aluminum. Some people drew more elaborate sketches and great sketches, but they didn't go into the detail. And this is, again, this is where the pilots were, and this is the aliens. Now they thought I should have drawn the texture of the skin and more detail, and I think they're right. But this took days to do this stuff, and it's been a long time since I did serious drawing in terms of being artistically inclined. But this is what I was picking up: spindly arms, and I also picked up the word Andromeda attached to this place. One of the interesting things that happened, and we talk about synchronicities in this business a lot. I didn't draw this image, and I wish I had. But when I was in the ship, I saw the guy who was unconscious slumped down at his console with his big egg-shaped head resting on the control board. And a few months after I did this, I found this picture drawing on Twitter or Facebook, and I didn't write down where it came from. But you see the guy slumped over the console?
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly what I saw, but from behind.
And is that a tree coming inside the ship?
That's inside the ship.
Yeah.
It's a tree. Wow.
No.
Oh, I don't know. It's just like I don't know what it is. It's a UFO.
It's the inside of the UFO, and you can see
apparatus.
The little gray
Mm-hmm.
inside, slumped over. I saw almost exactly that pose from the back. So maybe when they lose consciousness, they all slump in the same way, but I thought that was very interesting. This is the drawing of it's not very good, if I can get it. This is the top part. That's the ship in the sky that showed up with the lights on the rim. And this is the crash disk with rough drawings of trucks surrounding it. This is the rescue ship on top trying to mate with the disabled ship and dropping its liquid metal docking extension. And the fact that I said it was liquid metal was impressed Dave because it was detailed and not just drawing, even though the drawing wasn't that detailed. Now, some of my other drawings, he thought I should have drawn it in greater depth. And he's right, but I didn't have a lot of time. And there was a lot of data.
There's been a lot of UFO cases where they leave behind some kind of metal, whatever, some kind of spear or whatever.
Dripping metal and debris.
Some kind of metal situation, yeah, for sure. What it seems like, I think they're here, and there's probably different factions of them. Some of them hopefully are here to help us, others may not be, and they live here, and it seems like that's kind of what they're messing with on Skinwalker Ranch, whatever it is that keeps messing up their technology. It's like they don't want them to go farther. It seems like they're here, and they probably have always been here. But I'd like to hope there's different kinds, like people. Some are good King Arthur type aliens. Others may be like Jeffrey Dahmer.
Well, we didn't get a lot of feedback on individual remote viewings of this particular ranch because a lot had happened over a long period of time, and some things that other people picked up on that definitely happened. I was told that there had been a crashed ship, but that's all I was told. The other thing I was told that kind of relates to this is that at one point, 2 Air Force jets attempting to land were like batted out of the sky, and they both crashed. Now that's not the same thing I saw because I was definitely seeing aliens. The other thing that's interesting is after this is all done, I went back in, and I decided I want to see if I'm still going to see what I saw, and I did. And a strange thing happened. I went back into the ships, both of them, and I don't remember if I went in both of them the first time because it's all blended in my memory. But I went into the ships, and I started trying to communicate with the pilots. And I don't know why I did this, because I'd already witnessed the event come to a successful conclusion. But for some reason, when I went back the second time, it was like I was trying to guide them to do the right thing. Not the guys on the ground, not the Air Force guys, but the ship pilots. And to summarize it, it was basically I was explaining to both of the pilots, hey, there's no right and wrong here. There's no good guys, bad guys. Your ships are operating in our environment. We have certain laws of salvage laws of the sea and all that stuff. And, these military guys are within their rights to claim your ship. It crashed on our planet. And I said, on the other hand, this is to the rescue pilot. I said, well, that's your ship on the ground. You have orders to reclaim it. That's understandable. Those are your orders. They're in conflict with the orders of the guys on the ground. That's understandable. But there's still no right and wrong here. There's no good guys, no bad guys. So what you want to do is you want to go about this very slowly and carefully, and you want to not make any sudden moves that will precipitate a violent event. I was there a long time doing this, and I don't know what compelled me to do this. It was very similar to when I go into a paranormally afflicted house and I have to communicate with the entity and say, okay, what are you doing here? What do you want? I can cross you over if you want. So in that sense, I've had some experience with that, but this was back in 1976, an event that had already taken place. Yet I stayed with it, and I tried to make it very clear to these 2 pilots who didn't want any part of me. They tried to say, just go away. And I said, no, I'm staying. I'm trying to explain to them, look, if you do this right, I said, look, I'm from the future. I mean, it sounds crazy. I said, I'm real from the future. I know how this is going to end, but I'm going to walk you through it anyway. And this is what you need to do, and this is what you need to avoid. And I stayed with them, but I went back and forth between the ships a couple times. And at the end, when the ship was being carried to Antarctica, I stayed with the rescue pilot, who was somewhat injured, but not badly. And I said to him, you're getting to go home. Everybody has a right to go home. Whether you live in a house or a military base, everybody has a right to go home. And I know he didn't like to hear that. And I think I was referring to abductions without saying abductions, but I was trying to make it clear to him that, you know what, you're getting to go home. Everybody should get to go home. Nobody should have to, be, captured in a crash ship or whatever might happen to you. And I just drilled that into his head. He didn't like it, but I kept doing it until finally they got to Antarctica and I just broke off because I'd been in the session a long time. I don't know why I did that. They're talking about retro causation and remote viewing where you can affect the past. I'm not saying I did that.
Yeah.
But it's what it seemed like I was doing, because why would I waste all that time?
One of the things one thing that when you were telling about the UFO experience, we had Robert Earl White on, and he had a pyramid type UFO black one explode behind his house in the 90s in New Jersey, and the military came out, and he was young, like a kid, but a men in black came to the house and threatened the mom and said, we'll take your kid away forever if you don't tell people that it was a crashed helicopter. And they made her draw aliens And he's one of those rare UFO crash retrieval whistleblowers, but he was on. But it was just when I had my UFO encounters in Georgia, there was a house where so many UFOs were happening. A friend looked at me and said, Jeffrey, you're attracting them here. And I didn't know if that was true or not. I thought a lot of my stuff happened to me because I went through something horrible and suffered a lot. And it was kind of like a shamanic death.
Yeah.
17 had testicular cancer and had to go through all that crap. Lost one, went through chemo, and then got, I was healed from chemo and everything. And then my dad died, and I started having mass events that every house I moved in, it was almost like that suffering opened me up to seeing things. And I joke about Odin's eye, which an eye may be a little bit more important. Debatable, I guess, but taking that away from me somehow opened me up. So there's something to that, suffering and opening your senses.
Well, in the psychic world, the psychic subculture, a lot of people talk about that what wakes some people up spiritually is tragedy or major life changes or things that anything from a rape. I knew a military guy who said, you can open up your chakras by taking a parachute jump. That alone will do it because, you're putting yourself at high risk in an extreme situation, a life or death situation. You parachute damn well better work, but that will open you up. So
in my case, it might open up something, but I don't know about my chakras. I think I'd probably wind up pooping myself all the way down.
I'd be afraid I'd roll in DOA on the ground after that. But one of the things when I was having all those UFO sightings, some type of silent craft came out that was like a silent helicopter that was just a cockpit, and a dude that looked like Top Gun with all that crap on, like the military, Air Force or whatever, and he goes, and it shot away during those UFO stuff. So it's just interesting when you hear all these stories about what's really going on with all this military UFO stuff. It's almost like a crazy Star Trek X-Files episode that you can't even wrap your head around, but you get glimpses of it, and it's really, there's something to it as we're learning. It's real, but sometimes it's hard to believe.
If you explore this stuff, you'll encounter things that don't fit any frame of reference, and you just have to go with it.
I want to read that David Morehouse book. That what was the name of it? Psychic Warrior?
Psychic Warrior.
I'll have to check that out, for sure. Well, when it comes to clearing and some of these entities you come across, what do you think they are? Are they people that died?
Some of them are, and you can communicate with them, and sometimes you can talk them over, and sometimes they have to be kind of wrestled over, encapsulated in light and all that stuff. They aren't the problem, because it's as simple as you come with me, and if you don't want to, you're still coming with me. It's like I'm kind of like a sheriff. It's eviction time.
Come to you. How do you make that? How do you do it?
I don't understand it, because I've been learning as I've been going. I'll tell you the first time I did it, which is, foundational, but it wasn't how I learned to do it ultimately. This woman reached out to me on Facebook who knew of me as a writer, but also had heard I had become a psychic. And she and her husband and her teenage daughter had moved into a new apartment. The teenage daughter started complaining about this weird-looking guy who was showing up in her bedroom, and they dismissed it as imagination. Then one morning, the mother woke up, looked up, and there was the guy exactly as the daughter described. And by the time she got her husband awoke, he was gone. And the husband, as frequently happens in these cases, said, "You were dreaming," And then a few days or a week or so later, he saw the same guy. So they knew they had a problem. So she reached out to me to see, as a psychic, I could figure out what's going on. I tried to read the situation, and I did, but unfortunately, she kind of front-loaded me too much. She said, well, the apartment house is a new one. It's built on an old Victorian, foundation that burnt down, and the guy died. It was just a guy. Well, I don't want to hear that stuff. I want to not know anything that I don't need to know. Look at the situation. So I tried reading it, and I got fire and all that stuff. But I didn't trust the data, because I've been told certain things that I would rather have seen psychically than to have in my database going in. So for no reason I can explain, I said, let me see if I can't remote view this situation and see what I can do. Because it was a thing where I figured, well, I can't read it clearly psychically because she's filled my head full of stuff. I said, I can remote view it where she's not talking to me and see what I said. So I got in there and I found a man-like shape. I didn't see it clearly and I tried to communicate with it, but all I was getting was kind of an angry animal kind of mentality. And I'm thinking, okay, there's something here. I'm interacting with it, but there's no communication to speak of. And I thought, so what do I do now? And as soon as I asked the question, and this is funny because when I'm in a situation like this, out of body, if I kind of ask the question, I'll get an answer or guidance. And I asked the question, what do I do about this situation? And I heard, call in the archangels or call in the angels. I forget which one. So I sort of mentally did that, and a kind of portal opened up, and two figures came out, grabbed the thing, and took off, and there I was by myself. So the next day, I reached out to her by a text, and I said, I don't know if what I experienced is valid, but if what I experienced is valid, it's gone. And it was gone. Because she said it stopped that night, or never returned that night, which is what I hear a lot. If I do it, and I usually work around midnight my time, it's always stopped cold the night I work, which is very interesting to me because it points to cause and effect much more strongly than eventually it went away, or eventually the problem stopped. Yes. So what happened is I would check in with her periodically, and she'd say, no, nobody's seen him since. Nobody in a year passed, nothing like a year passed. Got to be gone. And eventually they moved, and the issue was no longer an issue. But I thought, well, that was interesting. When I later did others, I learned to take control of the situation and sort of portaled them out by opening up a portal. I don't know how I can do that, but somehow I can do that when I'm out of body. Or by wrapping in a white light and taking them through, a sort of tunnel, wormhole kind of thing that's a little different than the one we work in remote viewing, because I had other training with other people that's like remote viewing, but it's more spiritual and more spiritually configured. So what do? I do different things at different times. If I can entice someone to come with me, I'll take them over. If they don't want to go, I'll wrap them in white light, seal them up, and carry them over. Well, I'm not physically there, so how am I carrying them over? Well, some kind of mental control. What's interesting to me is sometimes I encounter very dark and negative things, and sometimes I fight back, but I'm always able to win, and I don't understand how I'm able to do that, because some of these things are bad.
How do they fight back?
Well, I guess it's all energetic Doctor Strange kind of stuff, just hurling energy and hurling force, because, I imagine myself like a physical human, and I'm sort of using my physicality, even though I'm not physically there, but I'm also using kind of that mental force that, in some of my training, we're told that when we enter this other realm, this other place where we're non-physical, we're in thought-responsive environments, which means if you're here and you want to be there, you just think and you're there. And if you want something to happen, you can think and make it happen. If you want to make yourself look like you have a lion head, you can present that to whoever you encounter. So it's not our physical reality. It's some spiritual reality or other dimension where thought rules and consciousness rules and the force of consciousness. I can tell you a lot of stories. I'm trying to think of one that really is interesting for understanding what I do. And I'll tell you this one. It's a little long, but it was one of the hardest ones I had to do because I had to figure something out that I couldn't figure out. Okay. There's this, it was brought to my attention, this guy had moved into an apartment in an old building in New England. And the building was weird because the first floor was a museum of some kind. I've never been there physically. And the second floor was apartments, or an apartment. I'm not sure. I think it was more than one apartment. It's probably a duplex. this guy had a problem after he started moving in. When we went to bed at night, the bed would start shaking. And it was, and it was a real problem because there was nothing shaking the bed. Nothing physical, nothing visible. And it started freaking him out. Well, this was brought to my attention through a guy who does mediumship work, who interacts with the public a lot, who steers people to me. This is one of the ones he steered. And I thought I would go in. Now, I'm not going to remember this story perfectly, so I may stumble, but I want to keep it compressed because it's a little long.
Okay.
But it went like this. I popped into this environment and I found myself in a dark place that when I mentally illuminated, it was the attic. And I thought, oh, that's interesting, because I was aiming for what I was told was a second floor bedroom. But instead, I ended up in the attic. I looked around, I didn't see anything. So I figured, well, if this is the right place, and it usually is, I'll just go through the floor and see if I end up in the bedroom. And I did. I saw a bed. Everything, by the way, everything is shadowy and grays and blacks and tones like that. I almost never see color when I'm doing this particular kind of work. There's other remote viewing where I do see color. But usually that's real world stuff. So whatever environment this is, it's a spiritual environment where color is not present, at least in terms of my ability to see things. So I ended up in the bedroom, and I saw a bed. I said, okay, this must be the right bed. And I kind of looked around, and I saw one or two odd figures, man-like, but taller than us. And I didn't see them that clearly the first time. And I took them under control. And it's very strange because I never did this before since, and it proved to be a significant insight into what I was dealing with, because I told them to kneel before me. A thing I would never do in real life, and a thing I wouldn't normally do in this. And they did. They were very docile. I can't remember if it was one or two at that point. And I just wrapped up in white light and carried them over. And I'm simplifying it, but the methodology is a little more detailed than that. But it's basically we're moving to the other side through a particular set of portals and stuff. So I got them out, or him out, whichever one it was. And I was told that everything stopped dead that night, and there was no activity for 8 or 9 days. And I said, well, I got it, or them. And I didn't think much about it. But then a week or so later, the bed started shaking again. So I went back in, and this might be where I found 2 of them instead of 1. And I got them under control, and I dragged them over. And again, everything stopped for more than a week. And that was fine. But then time passed, and there was more bed shaking. And here's where I started to get concerned, because up until that point, which is probably maybe 15 or 20 houses, I'd never been defeated. I'd never had a recurring problem that was of the same quality. So I stopped and I thought, something's going on in this house that's not normal, even though none of this is normal. And I thought it for a while. And you can never tell whether something's intuition or just your memory or you're connecting the dots. But I remembered that the first and the second time I went in, I ended up in the attic, which is not what I was aiming for. And I was told, by the way, that the guy who had the shaky bed thought landing in the attic made sense to him because the entrance to the attic is next to his bedroom. Well, it didn't make sense to me because it's not a bedroom. I don't care if I'm above the bedroom. That's not where I'm aiming. So I thought to myself, what could be going on, and why do I end up in the attic? Because I started to take the fact that I was ending up in the attic seriously as significant of what's going on. So here I sound a little bit like a detective, trying to puzzle out what's going on. And I remembered a case I'd done in the West Coast, I think it was California, where a woman had a problem with poltergeist activity. Soda cans would fly around and stuff. And her story was, when her daughter lived in that house, she had a bedroom. She was very sensitive, the daughter, and stuff was happening. And the daughter said, there's a portal in this room and people are coming out of it. So I thought, what if there's a portal in this place? If there was, where would it be? It would be the attic, because that's where I land. I mean, it all kind of clicked in my head. It said, okay, what if there's a portal and what I keep having to go back in because things are walking through the portal into this place? Okay. Now, the problem as a remote viewer is you're not supposed to know the target, the details of the target, because your imagination will drive the event. If someone says remote view the Eiffel Tower, you know what the Eiffel Tower looks like. You know, there's no fun in doing that. So I said, well, I'll go back to the attic and I'll take a closer look. And I got back at the attic and I illuminated because it was dark. I always do this stuff at night. And I found a portal at one end of the attic. And there were these guys clustered around the portal. Some of them were on the other side, kind of like trying to push in, and some of them had just stepped out. And I don't see things necessarily distinctly, but they were taller than us. Their body shape was, I don't want to say they were ape-like, because that's not the body shape, but they were like ape-like in terms of their kind of slow-witted, not very aggressive manners, and they kind of had heavier jaws than we did, and they were not very bright. And I said, you guys got to go back to where you, mentally, I said, you guys got to go back to where you come from. And I didn't hear words, but I heard stubbornness and resistance. So I kind of gave them an energetic push, pushed them through and sealed the portal. And that's when everything stopped dead and stayed stopped dead. What was interesting about it is that time, or maybe the second or third time, when I was struggling with one of them, it was after I had cleared the first few. The bed started shaking more violently before. And one time when I was in there, it was shaking in the same time period I was there, which made me think the guys who were left behind, who were coming to the portal, whatever they were more agitated than normal because they were missing some guys. I'd taken them out. Now, that's a supposition, that's a theory. I don't know what the truth is. So, when you talk about Bigfoot, these guys were kind of close to Bigfoot in the sense that they were kind of slow-witted, human but not human.
It's like Planet of the Apes.
Something, but they weren't really apey. They were kind of like
ape-like features, but light ape.
Really ape-like features. It's kind of ape-like jaws, but no, not even. But kind of like a heavy caveman might be better to say than ape-like. But they weren't us, and they were coming from someplace else. And when I finally closed that damn portal, they stopped. It was done. And that's not the only portal I've had to deal with. I closed the one in California.
It's weird how they always try to mess with the bed. Me and Christina, we lived in a house, and something one night after her grandmother died a few days later, it could have been her grandmother, I don't know what it was, but something slapped the bed in the middle of the night. And I got up thinking something fell off a shelf. Nothing fell, but something just, and we both were like, did you hear that? I mean, it scared us. And then there was a time here at this house, something did the same thing to the RV. No people were around. This is in the country. So there's something about, they like to mess with that, the slap stuff, beds and RVs. And I know on that Skinwalker Ranch episode, something hit his trailer. That was weird too. That was kind of a strange thing. But yeah, that's a crazy one for sure.
So I'm starting to think there is a shadow biome and things are wandering into our reality and maybe wandering back. And the way they interact with us are a function of their intellectual level. These guys were docile, but they were bigger than us. They were stubborn. They were of a low mental order. And I don't know what they would. I don't know who's opening these portals. And I don't know who's coming through them.
Be so dumb and have portal access. That's kind of scary.
Yeah. But, portals may be natural. I'm able to close them. I once, as an experiment, tried to open one in someone's house remotely, but nothing ever happened. So I guess I can close them, but I don't know how to create them. But
something to portals. We're learning that with that show with Skinwalker Ranch. I've seen black pyramid craft come out of a portal in Georgia, 3 of them with my mom, and she screamed and was like, "Oh my God, Jeffrey!" and don't like to talk about it and acts like a space cadet when I ask her about it. I was like, "Do you remember that?" I remember something, but it's like I've had experiences where I've seen a black pyramid craft over power lines with a friend and a ball of light come out towards us. I've had a bunch of UFO stuff where it's over me. I don't know if I've ever been taken. If so, I don't remember a damn thing. They mind wiped me and made me stupid. I don't remember being taken or anything like that. But there's been a lot of stuff where you're like, is that here for me? I don't want to be egotistical, but it kind of seems like it's over my house. That's happened a lot with witnesses.
Yeah, well, some people attract things, experiences, or experiences were called experiencers.
Jay's been having some technical trouble, so he's still here, but
Yeah.
keeps dropping. And with the Bigfoot thing, keep this in account. I mean, me and Jay's in the physical camp, and nothing I do is going to remove him from that. I'm quantum all the way. Ron Moorhead, pick up Quantum Bigfoot. That book, Ron Moorhead's one of the biggest Bigfoot personalities ever. That book is amazing. Quantum Bigfoot. Even he admits there's something weird. But imagine this. You got a physical Bigfoot that's like us, a human, and then when it dies or has an astral form, like a ghost, like humans do, humans see ghosts. Who's to say we're not seeing physical Bigfoot? Jay saw one in the window with children playing, and it freaked out because he saw it when he was younger and it ran off. Jay saw one. But who's to say we're not also seeing like a spirit of Bigfoot or something weird? Like a quantum. Like there's physical, yeah, but just like us, they may have a ghost form. I mean, it's not that illogical.
No.
To think for sure. There may be something to it. I don't know. I just say I don't know a lot, and that's my best mantra for a lot of this stuff. It's better than pretending like you know everything for sure. Like there's things with the exopolitics crowd that some of them should be writing Amazon alien erotica. Like some of the stories they pump out of that exopolitics that's supposed to be like alien whatever. Like they get kooky. Like Obama supposedly time traveled to Mars and Stargates and weird stuff. Like maybe that's true, but I don't know. I wasn't there.
As I said, there's a lot of disinformation out there, and there are also people telling stories for money and for attention, which is why I don't get wrapped up into anything that I don't personally experience. Although there are some really good books out there. I read UFO of God. It was interesting. I didn't see that episode of Beyond Skinwalker's Ranch for some reason, but from what I understand, the guy who's having experiences are having really powerful experiences, and the government is paying attention to it.
He seems genuine.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, he seems genuine. It's just all the government spooks that worry me. They worry me, but I don't know. It's just natural to be paranoid with them. It just comes naturally. It's hard to overlook. Government involvement. And then there's all
they
kinds
do
of
like to
lore.
get themselves involved in everything.
Yeah, I have a friend, Jerry Avalos, that claims they kidnapped him and like interrogated him, like my lab's weird stuff where they take you and crazy stuff. I mean, there's been stuff like that since Betty and Barney Hill. I believe those were genuine experiences, but there was one particular experience they had where the aliens were talking German. So sometimes you got to wonder if like governments are like pretending to be aliens too, which is possible. I don't know, but I'm not going to rule it out either.
I have an interesting story that relates to that. If you want to hear it, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I was invited to a wedding. This is maybe 20 years ago now, of a woman who I worked with who was a psychic, and I was going out with another friend who was a medium and his new wife who I had not met. So it's a long drive, and this is in Massachusetts. And so during the long drive, the bride, the wife, who I had not met, as I said, was looking around at the cars, saying, "Look at all these cars and all the people in them. Some of them must lead very interesting lives." And I said rather cynically, "Well, actually, most people lead really ordinary lives. And, the big things that happen to them are births, deaths, and, things like that." And she kind of laughed and said, well, I had something interesting happen to me once. I said, what's that? She said, well, when I lived in New Hampshire, when I was a teenager, or maybe she was a young adult, maybe she was in her 20s, I don't remember. She and her boyfriend at that time packed a picnic basket and decided to take a run down to the beach. And I assume they left late morning, early afternoon. I don't remember what she told me, but it was broad daylight. So they're in the car driving to the beach. And the next thing they know, it's pitch dark, somewhere around midnight, give or take. And they're on the same road, the same highway, driving in the wrong direction into traffic. Fortunately, there's no real traffic. They pulled over, compared notes, and both of them had the exact same memory. They were driving to the beach, and then the lights went out, and when they came back on in their heads, it was dark, and they were on the wrong side of the road. And they didn't know what to make of it. And when she told me this story, in fact, they agreed never to speak to anybody about it because it was too freaky. They don't, presumably from approximately noon to approximately midnight is 12 hours. It might have been 8, it might have been 10, it might have been 14. I don't remember what she said, if she even said how long they were out of their consciousness. But I said, well, you're talking about missing time. And she laughed kind of nervously and said, what's that? And I explained it to her. And I don't have to explain it here, except people who later remember or are discovered to have had abduction experiences, lose a few hours. These guys lost 10, 12, 14 hours, whatever it was. I don't know. And I said, I explained missing time, and she didn't know what to say. She'd never heard of this stuff. She didn't seem to be familiar with abductions either. She might have been, but she didn't comment on it. And I had been reading some books on the subject in that time frame, and I asked her a few questions, which I've forgotten. And she answered just all of them. And one of the questions that I remember was, when your daughters were born, did they have unusually large heads or something like that? It was something that had to do with women who've been abducted who later gave birth that had certain kind of issues like giving birth because their heads were very large. And she answered yes to all the questions. I think one of the others was, your daughter's very intelligent for their age. That's a subjective thing, perhaps. So, they didn't, neither one of them knew what to make of it. The medium was into medium stuff, not into UFOs. And this woman seemed to completely oblivious to all these phenomena. So I said, I have some books on the subject. I'll loan you one. And I grabbed a completely random book on alien abductions, which I hadn't even read at that time. And I loaned it to them. And he read it first and called me. I said, I read this book. It's freaking me out. I said, where's that? He said, well, this is the highway they were on when this happened. It's the same highway of that couple who were abducted. And when he first told me the story, I said, well, that was interesting. When it came up later, it clicked in my head. Saying, was that Betty and Barney Hill? He said, yeah, that was the one. So on the same highway, and this would have taken place, I believe, in the late 70s, somewhere in the 70s. So it's at least 10 years after Betty and Barney Hill. This young couple who went their separate ways had a big hunk of missing time. And you have to ask yourself, well, where was the car? And they weren't driving in a fugue state for 10, 12 hours. That's impossible. Not both of them. I mean, if one person had an experience, you might say blackout, drugs, this. You could spin a lot of stories that wouldn't be true, wouldn't explain it, but would at least give you some comfort if you were looking for some rational explanation. But they simultaneously lost consciousness, and they simultaneously regained it, and they hadn't left their seats. Except, of course, it must have somewhere.
Definitely interesting.
Yeah, and about the car, in most abduction cases, when a car or vehicle are involved, in most cases, it's on a very, very deserted road, not a very well-traveled road. Often the car is pulled over to the side or is on the side of the road and disabled, usually by, they say, the UFO. We don't know for sure, but somehow the vehicle is disabled. And then when they regain consciousness, they have probably been driving, like you said, in a fugue state, momentarily because the aliens do something to the mind of the victims that they abduct to make them lose the memory, but also when they put them back in their vehicle on the road, they can't be parked on the side of the road. So Betty and Barney Hill remember stopping on the side of the road to look at this UFO, and the next thing they know, they're driving down the road, but they don't realize they're 2 hours ahead, or 2 hours behind rather, until they get home and look at their watches, and their watches don't coincide with the watches at home. They're 2 hours off. So that's usually what happens with that. Is the car is disabled, and they are then taken for however long. In the case of Fire in the Sky, the guy, his name, I can never remember. Yeah, Travis Walton. Thank you.
I interviewed him a long
he was
ago.
gone. Yeah, he was gone for 5 days and didn't realize he was gone for 5 days. And when his friends came to pick him up, he thought it was only a couple of hours later. And they said, "Feel your face," and he went like this and felt 5 days worth of stubble growth and was like shocked. So the memory thing really messes with people's brains.
Well, this was quite an indirect confirmation of the Benny and Barney Hill story, since it took place in the same highway, more or less the same stretch of highway, but in broad daylight.
Yeah.
When it comes to some of your clearing cases, do you ever see anything physically with your eyes, like something that happens like paranormal, like a?
No. I'm lying down. My eyes are closed. It's usually midnight, between midnight and 1. And I'm just, in that out of body kind of thing. Now, I have to explain, I'm not doing an out of body experiment the way people who have, popped out of their body under amnesia or under anesthetic or things like that. I don't pop out of my body, see my body, look around my immediate environment, and then go off someplace to explore. This is more like mental or spiritual teleportation. You're going to a specific destination. So it's kind of like a big jump out of your body to some other place. And what I do when I clear houses, I say, give me the address of the house, give me the primary color of the house, give me any sublocation, apartment, back room, basement, attic, whatever. And when I do this, I've learned to go on Zillow or something and see if I can get a picture of the house so I can visualize it more clearly.
Yeah,
I've done a lot in New Orleans. I know a woman who lives there who's a psychic who just a lot of old houses here, and she's been pointing me to different houses. And I've cleared a number of ones in New Orleans because there's a lot of older houses and there's a lot of issues with that house. One of the ones that stick out was a very simple one. In New Orleans, they have the main house and then what they call the dependency, which used to be the slave quarters or the servants' quarters or whatever. And in this particular address, the people who walked up to the second floor of the dependency would see this black woman sit in a chair in full color, not ghostly anything, but full color, and just sitting there looking pensive. And numerous people saw this woman, so they asked me to take a look. So I popped in, and there was this woman, and I described the woman to them. She looked kind of Aunt Jemima-like in terms of her body type and her facial structure. And they said, yeah, that's what people were saying. So I popped in, and this woman, when she saw me popping in, she was just terrified. I could barely communicate with her. And I tried to communicate with her, and I did get through. I said, look, I'm here to cross you over. You're not supposed to be here. If you don't want to go all the way, you don't have to go all the way. Just follow me, and if you want to turn back, you can turn back. I had to coax her, and I crossed her over, and they never saw her again, to my knowledge. At least not during the first year after I did this. What was interesting is I couldn't get much out of the woman except she said she was a Yoruba woman. And when I looked that up, that's an African tribe that's very heavily settled in New Orleans. So that part was accurate to the city anyway. And that was a simple one, but it was a little difficult. But usually they don't see people in color. But in this case, people were seeing a woman sitting there, just like she was a flesh and blood person, except she never moved. And never moved much, and she didn't belong there, and so I got out of there.
I know there's been times where I've looked into the heavens, and it's been a while. It used to happen a lot at Silver Lake. I would go and off my back porch and look into the heavens and see a lot of those light beings. It's almost like, well, it is, from what I've seen, like a quantum rim around the earth. And it seems like we go into it when we sleep, and perhaps when we die, it's kind of like a weird staging area that's around the earth, and it almost looks like a Sims game or something. But imagine all the Sims are light beings. Like, I've had that experience a lot, and I wonder if it's dead people or if it's just people sleeping, and that's where we go.
Well, there's talk that when we sleep, we often are traveling here and there. We're meeting people we know in this life and having communication, or meeting people who have passed on and having communication. That maybe sleep, part of the functions of sleep, is for the soul to leave the body and be free, and maybe do some business or some social interaction before you have to resume your earthly duties. So I don't have any insight on that, except a lot of people seeing things like you're talking about, but you have to be sensitive to it.
I always remember Anne Rice calling sleep the little death in her books. It's kind of like croaking, but you wake up. But anything you want to add, Jay? You haven't been here in a while. Anything you want to ask about remote viewing or clearing or anything else? There you go. He just phased out. He went to another dimension. You still see me, Jay? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I keep getting. Yeah, I'm still here.
He phased out. Like it
Can you hear me?
Weird.
Yeah, I keep phasing in and out. I keep getting booted. But the remote viewing thing. I was in a school way back when I was in grade school. School specifically for people with learning disabilities, dyslexia, and some of the kids had emotional problems. But we had a couple of classes. One was they did the stuff where you can. It's a device that they hook up to you, kind of like an EKG, and then you can like internalize and look at your organs. I forget what biofeedback, I think it's what they called it. So that was really neat. But then they also did a thing where we were tasked to, the presenter put stuff in this one room in the school. And he asked all of us to imagine what he had put in this room. And almost every one of us, there were 8 of us, I don't remember the exact number, 6, 8, 9, 10 kids, we all drew the same thing. And we all got what the guy had put in the room. Then he took us into the room, and then what we had drawn was there on the table, and we were dumbfounded. It was like, how the hell does this happen? So it is a legitimate. I don't even want to call it a phenomenon because I've done it, so it can be done. UFO, they call it a phenomenon because we don't know what it is. Remote viewing, we may not exactly know what it is, how it works, but it is verifiable, and it has been. I don't know, when did they start the Stargate project? Back in the 50s or 60s?
Stargate goes back to the 70s, but it wasn't called Stargate in the beginning.
Okay, yeah. And I think it also was an offshoot from earlier, back in the 50s, when they were taking LSD at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds down in Maryland. They were giving soldiers acid and having them do certain tasks. Some of them were run through the confidence courses they were trained on. Others were to disassemble and reassemble their rifles or pistols, and they couldn't do it. And I think from that came the Stargate and the remote viewing. But it's a legitimate science. It's not. I can't even call it a phenomenon.
Yeah, it is. But we're raised, socialized, and educated to exclude our larger abilities, our greater abilities. We're trained to be 5 sensory, but we're not. We're multisensory, and also people have aptitudes, and other people have no aptitudes or little aptitudes, and they can't relate to this. I mean, even when I discuss this about, I pop into this environment and I find myself in an attic. I mean, the average person is not going to understand what I'm talking about. It's like a Martian when I say, let's say there were Martians and they came to Earth and they didn't have legs, they had like snail kind of pads. So when I said I popped down to the corner store to get the newspaper, they would say, well, wait a minute, what do you mean by pop? Well, I walked. Well, what's walking? Well, I have to explain it, but I can't completely explain it because even though I walked all my life, I can't really explain the mechanism. I can explain that I have 2 feet and they're coordinated a certain way, and I learn to walk. And sometimes I run, and sometimes I stand still. But when we're talking about remote viewing or mediumship, the average person, they don't know where the levers are, the buttons, the dials to turn things on and off, up and down, and they're completely lost. Think of it this way: someday they're going to invent a car that's going to be operated by mental control. They're already fooling around with a thing called a wish switch, which is you turn it on and off with your mind. I think the Japanese were fooling with it. So someday you're going to step into an automobile in the future, and there won't be a steering wheel or pedals or any of that stuff. Well, how are you going to operate? Well, you're not going to be able to operate it until someone trains you how to operate it. To train you how to use your mind to turn it on, hit the accelerator, whatever the accelerator thing would be, to steer it, and to do that on a multiple level. In other words, I am steering and accelerating at the same time. We do it now with our hands and feet. Sometime in some future generation, we'll be doing it with mental control, and you're not going to be born with that mental control. You're going to be trained to do it, and maybe some people won't be able to, or as well, but other people will be able to be natural. It's like that. You can have the aptitude, you can have the training. It's better to have both. And if you learn how to do it, it's okay. This is what I do and how I do it. But if you're outside looking in and you don't have any of these aptitudes, and you have a belief system that doesn't allow for it, it's like, this guy must be crazy to talk about this stuff. I'm not even talking about the crazy stuff. This crazy stuff I haven't talked about. That's crazier than this crazy stuff. But I've done approximately 40 house clearings, some of them more than once, because some people in houses will attract things down the road even after you cleared them. And it's become pretty normal for me. I expect success because I haven't had failure. I've only had setbacks. But the average person who doesn't believe in non-physical entities being in houses or portals or ghosts or whatever is not going to understand it at all. They might be fascinated by it if they see me as being a credible person. They're certainly going to be convinced if I ever clear their house. But another thing I do that I should mention, just I learned, because I'm learning as I'm going, is I learned after I clear a house to cleanse it energy-wise. And many people will say, when I woke up the next morning, I knew you'd been here. The house felt different. And it didn't feel different because it was quieter or the thing was gone. It felt different because I cleared the energy. I don't know how I do that. I just set my mind to say, okay, I'm going to clear the energy of this house. So I learned to do that as a kind of a way to be thorough about it. In other words, it's a complete learning experience in which, new insights happen and you act on them, and suddenly you realize, oh yeah, it's not enough to clear a house. You got to clean the energy before you go.
You said earlier that when you've cleared houses and had to go back, you've never had to clear it of the same energy or entity.
No,
but
different stuff.
Here's kind of a funny question, and it maybe it's a silly question, but have you ever gone to another location and
we lost Jay? He's frozen.
Please.
For some reason, it's breaking up. I don't know.
I think he was about to ask if I've gone to another location and seen one of the things
similar.
Not maybe similar in the sense of, well, here's another stray cat, but not similar in that, oh, this guy's over here. Because when I cleared them up, they never come back. To my knowledge, they never come back. It's always something else or something different. Or, there is apparently, we talk about ghost haunting houses, and that's true to some degree, but there are a lot of strays. And they just wander around, and sometimes they take up temporary residence in a place, and then they move on. They get bored and move on. So, that the idea of the wandering ghost is something I've encountered, and I've heard about from other people who deal with this stuff. That, there are strays walking around. They don't know where to go. They don't know how to leave the planet. They don't necessarily understand they're dead. It may have dawned on them that they're not physically here anymore, but they don't often, if you don't have a belief system or an understanding of what could or should or would happen, you don't always transition. Although lots of people, they're collected. I've done readings where, I would see the person in their deathbed, and somebody would come through the wall for them and take them away, and said, okay, some people are collected or escorted, but a lot of people aren't. And I don't know why that's true, if that's in fact completely the case.
I've had some strange experiences at one house where I know I can go outside and close my eyes and let the white light fill my body. And then I went into this one house and saw some gray-like beings, but they weren't gray. They were more like astral pink. At first, I thought it was just like a sunspot, or like where you see from a flash from a camera where it messes with your eyes. But then I was like, that looked like it peeked. It was standing over a grandmother, Christina's grandmother, who she was helping to transition for hospice. And it was standing over her and then looked like this at me. And it was almost, I don't know, it was like it was astral pink, but I could see it with my physical eyes. And it seemed somehow that sun connection let me see it. But later at one point, Christina saw one standing over the bed. And it said it looked really creepy, like it looked like a mosquito face. But
wow.
I've had friends have dreams of me being taken out a window by aliens, and I don't know if it was just his imagination or something was really taking me, but there's something about the sun and our souls and a connection. And I guess the whole Superman thing, you get your powers from the sun.
I met a young girl recently at a function where I was doing mediumship, and when she saw that I was a mediumship, she wanted to tell me about what was going on with her. Her mother was there who backed her up, and she, like you, because I don't see them with my physical eyes. I see them with my eyes closed. She says there's a lot of them walking around. And they follow her sometimes because she acknowledges them. And because she acknowledges them, they form a kind of a kinship with her. She has a few that seem to be guides. Others are just people who died, who don't have any place to go. And she told me something interesting. She said sometimes when she goes into a new building, like an office building or school or whatever, or a hospital, she's often greeted by a ghost or a spirit who will say, okay, you want to go to this room, so you go up this flight of stairs or take this elevator, and, make sure you go left instead of right. And she said that's happened to her a lot of times, and I was absolutely fascinated by her because she gave me the impression there were a lot more strays wandering around than I had previously considered possible.
It's just like there's just so many quantum realms around us, It's I don't know, you ever see that movie with Michael Shannon called Midnight Special?
No, I didn't.
If you ever get a chance, check it out. It's kind of about an interdimensional situation. I don't want to give too much away, but Michael Shannon and some kid and aliens. It's a good one, the Midnight Special. There's points where I've had so much alien stuff happen to me. I've said, am I an alien? Kind of look like one sometimes. I usually have a goatee and stuff, but now I'm Uncle Fester, so.
Well, you should write this stuff down. Maybe there's enough for a book.
Yeah. I have a few books. They're interviews with people from the show, and a friend of mine, Andy Colvin, who's known as the Mothman photographer. He actually got a picture of a Polaroid, and there's something in his window. How it's like a big fly face, which I guess he thinks is the Mothman. But there's a lot of transcripts of interviews, a Bigfoot book, and stuff like that. But yeah, I'd like to write my own. It's hard. It's discipline. I've been eyeballing all your books. They look really interesting. I want to pick some of those up. I really like weird stuff, and you definitely some very creative Tarzan and Sherlock Holmes hanging out. That's pretty weird.
I had King Kong meet Tarzan in one book. I have it right here.
Oh, wow.
And I took it, this was a dream project for a long time. People wanted to do this and couldn't get the rights because there were two copyright owners. Mm-hmm. My newest book, The Wild Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, Volume 3, in two of the stories, he deals with H.G. Wells' Martians returning to conquer England again, awesome. And he's got to deal with okay, they're back and they're smarter this time. For instance, they land underwater, so Earth's atmosphere can't poison them. How do we defeat them?
Ooh.
Poison the ocean, I guess.
Well, it's a big ocean. So what are you going to do?
And you have a website or anything?
Yeah, www.adventuresinbronze.com. Adventures in Bronze is all one word. It's called Adventures in Bronze because the first books I did on this website were about Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze, who was a pulp hero of the 1930s and 40s. And then I added Tarzan, who was also the Bronze Man. And then I added King Kong and the Spider and the Shadow and Sherlock Holmes and Cthulhu. I've done 2 collections, The Wild Adventures of Cthulhu.
Very cool. It's definitely some. I like the weird stuff for sure. I love Weird West. There's just so many. I've had Joe R. Lansdale on talking about Weird West. I love that kind of stuff. Now they have all those splatter Western books. I'm trying to get all those, but it gets expensive. There's so many of them. There's some really good stuff. Well, just briefly, we ended we got about 5 teals when we stopped. But I know you were co-creator of Squirrel Girl. Was that like you writing it, or do you illustrate too? How did that take place?
I was asked when I was writing for Marvel Comics to do a fill-in issue of Iron Man, and I had this idea knocking on my head for Squirrel Girl, a teenage girl with all the powers of a squirrel and the bushy tail, etc., who could talk to squirrels the way Tarzan talks to the great apes. And she was 15 and she had a crush on Iron Man, so she tried to convince Iron Man to make her her partner. And I was very delighted when I did the script and they brought in Steve Ditko, the co-creator of Spider-Man, to draw it because I was a big fan of Steve Ditko growing up.
That's cool.
And so he designed her and I conceptualized her. And she appeared in one story and disappeared for about 12 years. But when they brought her back, suddenly she was hot and caught on with the reading public.
Has she been in any animations or
Yes?
Or
yeah,
yes.
She was in that thing. Was it Marvel Rising with Ms. Marvel was introduced in, and Spider Gwen. They did about 4 or 5 of those. They did a TV pilot, New Warriors, where she was one of the characters. That was live action, but the pilot wasn't picked up.
I'll have to check that out sometime. One of the big ones from Marvel I'm buying a copy for my nephew, my brother, and me. Wolverine versus Predator.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
That's not pretty good. Definitely keeping up with that for sure. I want to check out Squirrel Girl too. And there's just so many lately. It's like you have a friggin' nervous breakdown just looking at all the titles. It's like I can't keep up with this crap anymore. I give up. And then now I'm doing the Fire and Ice prequel. That's Sarah Frazetta's coming on next Friday. Frank Frazetta's granddaughter. Those are pretty cool. Fire and Ice prequel comics. Those are from I think Opus. Those are pretty good. So we'll be talking about those next week. But so what are you wanting to do in the future? Is it what's in the cards for the future?
Well, my book series is called The Wild Adventures. The Wild Adventures of Doc Savage, the Shadow, the Spider, King Kong. I'm going to do another Spider. I've done 2 nonfiction books on the Shadow, the old-time radio character, and I'm putting together a collection of more of my articles in the Shadow for a 3rd one. I'm probably going to do another Tarzan because, I just released the 2nd book where Tarzan goes to Barsoom and interacts with John Carter of Mars, Edgar Rice Burroughs' other big character. And that's going over very well. So I'm going to do another Tarzan, although probably not on Mars. And who knows? I'm always come up with new projects. And I write short stories for anthologies. And I write a column for a thing called Retro Fan, where I cover 60s and 70s and 80s nostalgia. I usually cover TV shows. But I cover, cartoons and some other things. So I do histories of old TV shows. I just turned in Peter Gunn and Miami Vice before that, and sometimes there are interviews. So I'm a very busy guy.
So I got a good trivia question for you. I love animation. I consider myself sort of an aficionado. And a little bit of an expert. There's only one true answer to this one that I'm aware of, but what was the first Japanese anime?
The first Japanese anime? I don't know, because Japanese anime is not my area of interest.
Oh, that's too bad. The correct answer is the Eighth Man, who was the bionic individual.
Well, I'm familiar with the Eighth Man. I watched it, and I've even written about it, but I'd forgotten that it was technically the first anime.
Yeah,
I think it's more of a. I think it's kind of more of a predecessor when you think about what anime became.
Oh, absolutely. If you've seen the original Eighth Mans, they are, I mean, it's basically like stick figures with moving backgrounds. It is awful as far as animation goes. But at the time, 1956, it was probably state of the art. But today, you look at it, you'd be like, oh, you would retch.
I'll have to check those out. I like weird stuff. I love to find old stop animation type stuff. Saw that Mad God recently. That was pretty weird. But there's like, if you look up stop animation movies, there's so many. I just got a hold of some really weird ones that were on Amazon.
All of the classic Christmas shows, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Frosty. That's all stop animation.
A lot of work in that stuff. That Pinocchio by Del Toro. God, I can't imagine all the work that they put into that thing. That's crazy detail and everything. And so the Beyond Skinwalker Ranch, they didn't get to use it. They're going to put it at the site, or is it going to be used later?
They cut the segment, which is only 5 minutes, which wasn't long enough, and they put it on the website, the History Channel website. And this talk about maybe they will revisit this tasking, which there were 70 remote viewers, of which I was only one. Which is the largest remote viewing group ever to be run against a single target. They're talking about maybe in season 2 they might revisit this whole thing because we just had so much incredible data. And mine was just what mine was. Other people picked up other things entirely, but intersected with mine in the sense that particular ranch is a hotbed of very strange activity.
What is it about these ranches? Is it just that they're out in the country and
probably the
alien bases under them?
The remoteness is probably the key thing. Nobody's going to put a base under New York City.
Yeah,
that's true. I got that Merging Dimensions book. Which ranch is that? I haven't read it yet, but Merging Dimensions. Bradshaw Ranch, I picked that one up in UFO of God, but I haven't read. I'm reading UFO of God. I haven't read Merging Dimensions yet. That sounds pretty fascinating about, I guess, Bradshaw Ranch. But it's definitely fascinating stuff, and we appreciate it so much. Will, you definitely are a very unique guest, and that's what I like to provide. And I've been trying harder to do it as we go into my Halloween lineup. I start Halloween now, so. But we got a lot of good ones. Sarah Frazetta coming up. I got Mark Dizziak, The Death of Edgar Allan Poe, Stephen Flowers, Gothic Meditations at Midnight. And then I got Mark Aliosa from Dark Ink Publishing for our Halloween show where he's got all these biographies with Kane Hodder and Gunnar Hansen, the dude that played Leatherface in the first movie. And he puts out books that's just interviews, like biographies of those kind of people. So we're going to interview him. And then another good one was it Fred Anderson, Northern Lights from Sweden is coming on. He wrote a good UFO book called Northern Lights, and he's coming on. And what's interesting is one of my other co-hosts told me that he had a bunch of alien black box stories in this book.
Oh.
I had an encounter where me and a friend saw some little hooded beings in the woods, and me and the friend were partying. It was when I was younger. We were doing all kinds of crazy stuff, but we saw these 3 little cloaked beings in the woods, and there was a black box in front of them. We both said, "Do you see that?" "Yeah." "Do you see that?" And then a cat jumped towards them, and they vanished. And I don't know. I couldn't see their faces. They looked like skinny Jawas. I know those Greer had those little alien mummies, and I know there's a lot of controversy with Greer, but when I saw those little dead alien mummy bodies, I was like, is that what was underneath those little cloaks? Like, is there little tiny aliens running the show? But anyway, Fred Anderson has a bunch of weird alien encounters from Sweden with people in black boxes and aliens, like all kinds of weirdness.
Cool.
So we're going to get into that. I've thought about that black box from forever, and Phantasm and those dwarfs and stuff. It reminds me of that, like the little Hellraiser box. Like, what is that little black box that I saw? And they were just, it was just sitting in front of them, and they were just three of them, and they didn't seem like they were moving. And a cat jumped towards them, and they just poofed, vanished away.
Well, I've seen little guys in remote viewing that I don't know what they are. And but this is another issue with people's houses where there are unwanted co-tenants, and some of them are only 2 feet tall. I never got to tell that story tonight. Maybe some other time.
Michelle Desrochers does a lot of clearing for me that remotely, and she's been on a lot of shows. She says she's found shadow people a lot, and then one time an interstellar demon, and I was like, what? And grays, and then recently a small being that seemed mischievous that she said it hitchhiked from some restaurant that had wooden panel, and my brother goes to this Mexican restaurant. Apparently there's a weird little dwarf running around here, according to her. I believe there's something to the remote viewing and distance, but sometimes my brain's got to wrap around it. It's a lot, but I believe there's something to it, and I've seen enough weird stuff to where I don't rule anything out. But there's definitely something powerful about it, and it seems like you got to have some good confidence.
Yeah, you can do some experiments with remote viewing yourself. And this is kind of a cheat, but sometimes when I'm bored and I can't sleep and the room is dark, I keep my eyes closed. Now I know where things are in my room, but I'm lying on my bed. I don't know. I can't point my head to it without my eyes. So what I'll do is I'll try to envision a specific target in my room, a shirt on the floor, the radiator, something, and I'll concentrate on that thing, and then I'll sit up and I'll look in that direction. I'll open my eyes, and I'm on it or I'm not. Most of the time I'm right on it or just a little bit off. You'll be surprised how quickly you have to let your room get completely dark, keep your eyes closed till your eyes dilate enough, and give it a try. You'll be amazed how quickly you zone in. You won't get it right the first couple of times, but eventually you'll be like, bam, there's my target, and you'll be surprised.
What were you going to say, Will, about confidence? That's a big part of it. Just be.
Well, confidence is something you learn. When I started remote viewing, I'd already had a couple of years being a professional psychic, so I learned fast in terms of being able to trust, at least provisionally trust the data I was perceiving, the impressions I was getting. You're never 100% sure, but it's when you learn kind of like where the buttons and controls are of this ability, in the broad sense of this ability, since it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. You kind of relax and say, okay, I don't have to be right 100% of the time or even all the time, but if I'm mostly right, that's what matters, and so you just relax. I say the 3 R's of remote viewing and psychic work are, relax, receive, report. You got to relax to receive the information, and the information isn't any good unless you write it down or present it to somebody. So it's useful, even if you're presenting it to yourself, writing it down, saying, okay, these are my perceptions of this target. Go see if that's true. So relax, receive, report. Sometimes psychic function is as simple as that.
Well, we got to close out. It's been great, Will. Thanks so much. What's your website again for everybody?
www.adventuresinbronze.com. Adventures in Bronze is all one word.
We appreciate it so much. Thanks for a great show, and we thank you for being here, and thanks to Jeffrey for helping me get you on. And I definitely think with this weird stuff and those little dwarfs, there's something to the fairy phenomenon and a connection there. I mean, that's old as time, those weird stories and stuff. So there's something to those little creatures and all that, the wee folk and all that. There's something to all that. But we appreciate it so much, Will. Thanks so much. And keep us in the loop. And I appreciate it. Thank you.
No, I was glad to be here. It was fun.
Thanks,
all right,
Great
everybody.
show.
You're listening to United Public Radio, 107.7 FM New Orleans. Everybody have a great night. Thanks, everybody. I got to play some weird little commercial.
Oh, yeah.
Looking for stories that are fresh and new? Dark fantasy, humor, space exploration, time travel, cyberpunk, alternate history, and more. They're in the L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future anthology. From 24 award-winning authors and illustrators, plus art and writing tips and bonus stories. L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future. Buy your copy at galaxypress.com, Amazon, or wherever books are sold.
All right, let me end it.